And last but not least, Jenny.
Right, I'll try and be really quick because I know you probably want to get onto those questions. Right. Okay. Well, I applied for a job in 1978, in the spring of 1978, for the West Glamorgan Common Ownership Development Agency, which Dave had a hand in setting up because he secured an urban programme grant for that and for about three other economic development initiatives, including anti-Ivy, and I forget what the one in North Wales. There was one in North Wales as well. And I did so because at the time I was working as a domestic assistant in Singleton Hospital, I think. And I'd gone to South Wales. I can probably hear from my accent, I'm from the north of England, but I'd ended up in South Wales and in about 1972, and had spent the next 5-6 years basically being a community activist, doing bits of jobs, involved in the Claimants Union, helped set up a sort of a bookshop co-op, which was a bit wild, called Revolt Books, and also set up a printing co-op. We called it Swansea Socialist Printing Co-op. So on the basis of that, I blagged my way into persuading Dave and other people to give me the job. I hadn't even heard of ICOM at this point. It was 1978. So I kind of read up a little bit about it and thought, right, okay, well, I'm sure I can do this. So for the next 11 years, the poor souls in South Wales had me to put up with. But it was great. It was a lovely time. I really, really loved it. And of course, you know, less than 1 year later, Thatcher came in. Unemployment shot up from 1 million to 3 million. South Wales was particularly badly affected. And I was lucky because although based in Swansea, and to begin with, I was the only paid worker on this 5-year programme, which was supported by West Glamorgan County Council through this urban programme grant. We did gradually manage to expand it, and we did all sorts of things, and I really enjoyed it. So as I say, I haven't got a lot of time. I don't want to take up too much time, but we did expand, and by the time we left, I think we'd started 50 worker co-ops, some of them in the valleys, all sorts of things, fishermen's co-ops. We had 3 taxi co-ops, all sorts of things going on really. And you know, a textile co-op set up by sewing co-op called Happy Days, set up by women whose husbands all worked in the steelworks, and that was really interesting in terms of kind of social changes in gender relations and everything that happened as a result of the women doing that. And anyways, lots of good stories there. And then what happened was that I moved north, partly because my dad was killed and my mum needed me to be a bit nearer. And so I moved north and I took a job with Manchester City Council, heading up a new unit that they set up, which was basically about co-ops, community development, etc., and ended up being drawn into, I suppose, economic regeneration. I ran the economic programme for Hume City Challenge, which was a regeneration programme in the middle of Manchester for several years before moving to Halifax. One thing which is very interesting, though, talking about Coventry, is that for the last 12 years until last May, I was a councillor and subsequently cabinet member on Calderdale Council. And the leader of the council for the last 2 or 3 years has been one Jane Scullion, who wrote the Coventry Co-ops course, which I used to use quite a bit extensively in training said steelworkers' wives in cash flow and all the rest of it, really. So it's really interesting how it kind of came full circle. That's it. That'll do for me. And then you want to get into,
Jane came to Coventry to work for the CDA.
That's right. That's why it was called. Yes, and she was very involved in writing the thing, and that's why. And it was called on that green and white. I can still see the green and white book cover, Coventry Co-ops course. Yeah.
And Andrew, her partner, went to work with Jane at Leicester, and I think François interviewed him already.
Andrew, right?
Yeah.
Andrew BB, yeah.
Sure, and both of them have been really incredibly active up here in the north of England, in Calderdale for the last 35 years. And I hope that Chaz has sort of forgiven Calderdale for nicking Suma, which is still one of the most successful worker cooperatives in the business. But that was not to do with me. That happened long before I got here. Anyway, thanks very much for that, and let you get on to your questions, François.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for sharing these fascinating stories, many of which would be worth organizing a new a new interview like for each of them really. So now I think it's time to move on to the next phase of that session. So for this part, I would just like you to go into a bit more detail about the agencies you worked with and the CDAs. And so I call this session running the CDAs. And the three questions I was asking were, well, how was your agency sustained and funded? And so some of you already gave some answers to these questions. I was also interested in the time it lasted, like how long they operated and how many people they employed. So if any of you have some quite accurate memories from the times, I would be glad to hear. So, would anyone like to start to talk more about the running of the CDAs and people working there and the time they operated? Well, maybe the question to ask is, has anyone any any figures or any precise memories to share?
I could say almost in one sentence that I didn't work in the CDA. I worked directly in the economic development, which was called Industry and Estates. I was the first cooperative development officer in Leeds and the last, because the job lasted for 3 years. John Trickett, who is now an MP, when I left, I resigned with no job to go to, but out of frustration, said there would be £250,000 put into this and there'd be plenty of money. They never recruited another person, and that was the end of the story. I don't know if I was responsible for that, but there was a certain type of Labour politician for whom co-ops is not something that they get excited about, and that at the time was the problem. So that was quick. I was out, and that was the end of it.
I'm happy to just say a little bit about West Glamorgan Common Ownership Development Agency, although David will be able to correct me if I get the figures wrong. I have a feeling that our first grant was something like 25,000 or something. It wasn't a lot anyway. But basically, it was the urban programme took, you had to have the local authority had to put some money in, and then you got this, central government grant and so on. And that lasted for about 4 or 5 years. And I think it was me on my own, and then I think we had a 10 hours a week secretary, who came to work, and then subsequently we were able to expand the operation. I was really pleased that actually West Glamorgan County Council, we persuaded them to continue to fund it after the urban programme grant ran out, which I think was quite an achievement by everybody, really. But at the same time, we were busy putting in for other grants, and I can't for the life of me remember which programme we got it from, but we set up this thing called the Cooperative Youth Initiative, and that enabled us to employ two people, who I think at least one of whom is still kind of quite actively involved, and it sort of did what it said on the tin. Really, I decided we'd set ourselves a target that every single school in West Glamorgan would have some sort of input about co-ops over the next 3 or 4 years, and I think most of them did really, and we'd have odds and ends of conferences and things like that. And meanwhile, we did actually, I think we probably expanded to have, there was me and I think probably a couple of co-op development officers by the time I left in, because I left in 1989. So I was there from 1978, which till 89, which sort of made me a bit of a granny of the co-op movement. And it was on the strength of that I got the job with Manchester City Council. But I think that when I left, including a part-time secretarial post, there were half a dozen of us really. Now what happened after that, and I didn't really, for various reasons, family reasons and other commitments and everything, and settling into working in the north of England again, I didn't particularly keep in touch with what went on in West Glamorgan, but I'm pretty sure that they were able to keep going for about another 4, max 5 years, by which time you were into austerity Mark 1, Thatcher's austerity. And I'm pretty sure that at that point, in common with what some other people have said, the county council, and probably, you know, in Swansea City Council, but basically they took a decision that what they were going to do was to try to bring it in-house, and it was going to be simply become a branch of their economic development function. But David might very well be able to correct that. But that, in answer to your first three questions about how long did it go on for, who worked for it, and I can't remember the total budget of it. And the other thing I should say is that one of the things that was quite significant for us was that we also were involved in, there was an ICON Women's Link Up, Industrial Common Ownership Movement, Women's Link Up approach, and we tried to kind of get money out of Europe, which we did. For, you know, me and Anna White, we did get money out of Europe to run a women's cooperative training, which was kind of like across the country, but we got a bit of the action about that in South Wales as well. I'll shut up there now.
I think I saw John's hand raised.
Oh, the only reason I raised it was I wondered if you wanted to do the same as you did in the last round, which was you go round and tell us, be our chair and tell us whose turn it is to speak.
Well, no, I was rather expecting you to, well, actually participate when you feel the most comfortable, or.
Well, why don't I now, since I've got the floor? So we were funded entirely by the West Midlands County Council, and I think the historical context is really important. That there were, I think, 7 metropolitan county councils. Is that the right terminology in England? I think I can't remember how different Scotland and Wales were then, so I'll leave that. And all of them were Labour controlled, and all of them were fighting the Tory government and its deindustrialization and the rapid increase in unemployment. And they were all kind of inventing economic development. And none of them had done it before. The term was new, I think. So, and they were led, in our case, there were 2 politicians, Jeff Edge and Gary Titley, who led all that. Jeff had been an MP, defeated in 79, elected in 74, defeated in 79. So he basically transferred his political activism to the county council. He didn't lead the council, but he led the Economic Development Committee, and they funded all the co-op development programs in the West Midlands and continued doing so until they were abolished by Thatcher in 86. And our city council didn't fund us at all. They were old Labour. They didn't really, like, who was just saying about, Chaz was saying about, they didn't get it. They were like the Leeds lot. And so we had quite an awkward relationship with the city council. But what the county council did was they cracked the European funding puzzle. And suddenly all this ESF suddenly appeared on the scene. And I can't remember the details, but I think we learned at some point we took over doing it ourselves, but I don't remember exactly how and when. And then at some point, Coventry City Council did start funding us. But again, I can't remember exactly when that happened. We started off with 1 worker, and I think we then went to 3, and maybe we got a few more with some European money. I can't remember. And then the other thing that happened was when they abolished the county councils, in our case, I don't know what happened in the other areas, they gave us £250,000, one to buy the building we were in, and the other part of it was to buy a factory unit, which we then ran as a cooperative workspace. With we got Urban Aid grant to subdivide the building into 13 workshops and sort of factory units, and the building we were in, we got money from Urban Aid to convert into a community radical office building. We had 20 odd clients, and that lasted until last year, when for some mysterious reason it went bust. I really don't know what's happened. I'm trying to find out what happened. And so the county councils were really critical.
I think particularly in London. I mean, a lot of this history, I think, focuses around the GLC, the Greater London Council, and Ken Livingstone, and the adoption of Ken Livingstone of the alternative economic strategy of the Labour Party that had failed, right, to win a general election, and then got adopted by the Metro Councils, particularly the GLC, and the GLC were big leaders in funding CDAs. At one point, there was a CDA in every London borough, so there was 22 CDAs in London alone. I mean, they came and then they went, but also, and what you're referring to, John, with the European funding is that there was a move from individual projects being able to apply directly to Brussels for funding to actually a requirement. I think it changed in 1984, where there had to be consortium bids, and then later on it turned into national bids. All right, so there was, and that changed who bidded. So, for instance, by the late 1980s, it was ICOM who were bidding nationally, but in the early 80s, bodies like London Co-operative Training, which was a consortium of 22 CDAs, bid for training funds from the European Social Fund, and that a large part of the budget was coming from that, and also from the GLC. But GLC was much hated by Thatcher. It was part of the big warfare, and it was very politically driven. I mean, at the time, I was having fantastic fun. I was also very heavily involved with a guy called Sam Aronovich at the London the local economy policy unit at South Bank Polytechnic, as it was then. And again, he was very, very influential in the sort of political theory making around all of this. But things, happened so rapidly. I mean, just as a little aside, I mean, there's so many things that happened that you didn't quite pick up on. And I can remember, I now realize early on in about 1981, when I was doing some work for Newham CDA, that's where I met Benjamin Zephaniah as a very young guy, a radical down from Birmingham who'd found a home in East London. So the spirit back then was very, very, I mean, it was sort of extremely romantic, revolutionary, alternative. And what destroyed it was trying to use that to solve unemployment. It was just like no chance. The actual early spirit, the stuff around the Federation of Northern Whole Food Collectives, it was collectives, communes. It was a vision of an alternative world that quickly ran into the buffers in the late 1970s as the shock reality of what was happening to the economy struck home, and things were falling apart, very, very quickly. So there was a great book, actually. I mean, if you really want the best guide to this, if you haven't read it, is Jobs and Dreams by Jenny Thornley.
Yeah.
Have you come across this publication?
Yeah, I've read it. Yeah.
So that's a very, very, I would say, accurate, and even the title is very, very clear about that. Jobs and Dreams. It's a very good way of putting what was going on at the time.
Thank you.
I just want to stress that point about unemployment. All the funding that we got was politically justified by the politicians as dealing with unemployment. That was the big issue at the time. And it was part of a programme of grants from the county council and then the city council, which included, for example, funding a project called the Unemployment Centre in Coventry. And there were a couple of other job creation. It was all about jobs, because that was the big political issue. In a place like Coventry, the car factories were closing down all around us. That whole deindustrialization was rampant, and unemployment. There were marches for jobs at the time, if you remember. So that was the issue, and that was the political currency that we benefited from, if you like. And as Jim says, that wasn't necessarily what we were in it for, but it is what the politicians were in it for.
Yeah, I think Jenny wanted to react at some point when Jim was talking. Am I right? Or would you like to have a word, Jenny? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. So if there's no other points to be made or more information to be shared on that issue, I suggest we move on to the next. But yes, John?
Jane, Leicester wasn't in a metropolitan county, Jane, and Derby wasn't. So yours must have been different.
No, they were both funded by county councils. So Derbyshire County Council funded Derbyshire CDA. But what you were saying about jobs was right. And there was this sort of theory that a failed factory, if it just set up or that had shut down because of deindustrialization, was bought out by workers with their redundancy money, then it would be successful again if you called it a co-op. And that was a heck of a it was set up to fail, really, because you were trying to help people into work against a background that was mitigating against those massive job losses. And very often people who wanted to work in co-ops wanted to work in a different way that didn't treat them like a number, that just got made redundant because of big decisions that they had no influence on that were made elsewhere, and so wanted to do different types of work. And the strapline for Leicester CD8, Leicester case today is change the way you work. So we are looking at work and still paid work, obviously. And a lot of people, I work with some architects the other day, they're in Nottingham, because I don't just work in Leicestershire, that's not the nature of the work we do now. And they, were very clear that they expected to be paid well for the work that they did. They'd trained for a long time to become architects. They're professional, but they wanted to work in a specific way, and they wanted to choose the people that they worked with and the projects that they worked on. And so didn't want to go and work for an architect company that would just give them, get the contracts in and put them to work doing things they didn't really want to do or believe in. So yeah, so you were kind of like caught in a cross stream, really. You had the expectations of the paymasters who were funding you, and the expectations of the people you were working with, really, to satisfy.
Well, thank you very much. And talking about jobs and creating jobs, and also meeting funders' expectations, that leads us to the third phase of this session about the success of CDAs. So I understand this is a trickier question, but at some point in my thesis, I'm trying to to assess the role of local CDAs. And so I've read some papers already by Alan Thomas, Chris Cornforth, for example, and I just wanted to put it in relation with your experience. So the questions I wanted to ask they're quite precise. So I was asking for the approximate running cost of your local CDA in terms of payroll, premises, and I was looking to comparing this running cost to the number of co-ops that you helped create, the number of jobs that they could provide, and also the number of inquiries that you received when working in cooperative development. So I don't know if any of you managed to gather some data or have some clear memories about that. But if anyone does, please go ahead. Otherwise, if it's just approximations.
François, François, I think what I need to do, and I'm sorry, I'm up to my neck in. I'm doing this MA in the Peace Studies department in Bradford at the moment, and I'm up to my neck in reading. So I haven't had I've absolutely no time to kind of dig in. I think somewhere or other I've got one of the last reports from '89, which will give figures, both the figures, and I will try to see if the last one that I was involved in, as I say, it went on for another 5 years. And that'll give me the figures of what the actual costs were there. As I said, there were about 50. When I left, there were 50 co-op enterprises in West Glamorgan that were operating. Some of which did continue to run for quite some considerable time, and some of which, at least one of which, continued as a business, but managed to somehow or other stop being a co-op, which was which was a bit of a disappointment, but there you are. But other people may very well have had a chance to do more digging than I did. But that's just to say that I will try and see if I can find something.
Yeah, thank you very much for
some
that.
information, and if I can, then I'll send it on to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Jane, please go ahead.
So this is quite rough and dirty maths, but for how we run now, there are 6 associates, and we all pay a membership fee of about £250 a year, and that goes to our central costs. In 2019, we had the bright idea of closing down our office, which was costing us about 20 grand a year, and all working from home. And then 3 months later, COVID hit, and that's what everybody thought of doing. So we were really ahead of that. Was a bit lucky. So we haven't got any office costs. We meet in, we do have monthly meetings, we have weekly meetings on Zoom like this. And then we get contracts in, and the workers, those of us who are in the contract, get the contracts. That's what we pay our membership fee for. And our fee is about £400 a day. So that's what we earn. And then the contracts obviously pay more than that. And that, I think, whatever percentage or is over the top of that goes to the central running costs. So we pay an office administrator who works for us, keeps our books, does all the admin for the contracts that come in, keeps an eye on the website where the inquiries come from. And the co-op development work that we get is largely generated by we contract with Co-ops UK, and they have they run a programme funded by the Co-op Bank to give business advice and support to co-ops, and that's mainly where we get our co-op development work for. But obviously we promote on our website that we support co-ops, and we also get a small grant from Central Co-op, or have done up until now. We're waiting to hear this year, I don't know their final figures. They pay us out of the profits that they make, so that's their sort of social, their community development is some co-op development. So yeah, so that's where our co-op work comes from. So we use that money to promote and to work with co-ops if there's any gaps in our funding programme. We try and do our business support free at the point of delivery. So when people come to us, very often they don't know they want to be a co-op, and that's the point. When you say you're a co-op development, people do go to other business advisors, but they never get offered a co-op as an option because nobody ever knows about it. And then if somebody says, "Oh, well, we want to be a co-op," or if they go to a business advisor and it's a bit of an awkward one or a bit different, they send it to us. But yeah, that's how we operate. I don't know how
and do you know how many co-ops or people you're assisting right now?
No, and I'll like Jenny, I'll go back and I'll find those figures for you, current, and if I can find some old reports, I'm sure there are some certainly from Leicester CDA kicking around with those figures that you're looking for. So I'll send them on to you.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, if you get an idea of what it was like in the 80s, probably that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.